and welcome to East Kent Schools Together Christmas Paper Craft. I'm Esther Miles, the artist in residence for East Kent Schools Together. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be bringing you a series of lockdown crafts you can do with materials you probably already have in the house. We all know that craft is very good for your mental health. Especially over the Christmas period, it's also really important to make your house feel festive and welcoming, especially when we can't go out much. It's a great way to bring the family together, as all of these projects can be done by everyone together or individually. This week, we're going to be looking at these Decoupage Baubles. Now, as you can see from my enormous mound here, I've been making these for years. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful collection of paper that I've been acquiring since I was about 11 years old. I'm using this Japanese washi paper, but don't worry at all if you don't have anything like that. You can use old wrapping paper, especially if it's not shiny. You can even use old newspapers to really stunning effect. Now, lots of you might have some really yucky old baubles that have lost a bit of vitality over the years. This is a really great way to give them a revamp. Now, to make these baubles, you will need some paper, an old bauble, lots of glue. I've got PVA that dries clear, a really gross old brush, and a glass or something that is smaller than your bauble to rest it on. Now, the first thing we want to do is rip up the paper. If you prefer a neater edge, it's completely fine to cut it with scissors. Now, we don't want to go too tiny because that will give us loads of work. So I suppose these are approximately sort of 3 centimetres by 2 centimetre rectangles, but it really doesn't matter at all if they're different shapes and sizes. In fact, it's quite useful. Now, you want to make sure you have enough paper to cover the whole of your bauble. It might take more than you think. Now, it's best if you have a bauble that you can take the top off. If you don't worry, you'll just have to go neatly around the top. Let me take that. And I'm going to start on the bottom half of my ball. Now, you want to put a thinnish layer of glue. No big blobs, about the same size as one of your little rectangles of paper. Just going to lay that on there like that. Now, at the moment it doesn't want to curve over the ball nicely, but if you start painting the glue over it, it starts to weaken the paper and then the paper becomes more malleable. So what is slightly important is to push out all of the bubbles from underneath the paper. So can you see I'm sort of pushing out with my brush, and that squeezes all the bubbles out. And if you push quite firmly, then you can get rid of some of the creases. You're not panicking too much, but it's good to get rid of as many as you can. Then I'm going to paint where my next piece of paper will be. And then I'm going to overlap that slightly. And do the same process again. Squeezing out all of the bubbles. And I'm just going to repeat until I've done about half of the bauble. I'm using this bauble because it's the least Christmassy bauble I can possibly imagine. A sort of swirl of grey and black doesn't really scream Christmas to me. This will make it much more cheerful. It gets to be around this point a bit like a sort of jigsaw as you try and find the right piece to fill the right gap. It's quite enjoyable in that way. Decoupage is such a versatile craft because you can basically cover anything with paper. I've seen chairs, bookcases, whole walls, as well as small objects like this. And it's a really good way of giving something very boring a new lease of life. What is important is that we're keeping on pushing outwards from the centre to avoid those bubbles and creases. If you don't mind getting a little bit gluey, I'm used to it by now, you can actually push out some of these creases with your thumb, but be prepared to get mucky. I have to say it is slightly easier on a bigger bauble because obviously the curvature is less pronounced and so the paper tends to crease less. But I have done tiny balls in the past. Just maybe rip up your paper a little bit smaller. Right, I think that's a good place to stop. So I'm going to pop it on my glass. Yeah. Have a last look to see if I've got any big bubbles or creases. I think that's okay. Now you can go over the whole thing now at this stage with another layer of glue, and that's just going to make it extra shiny in the end. So I'm going to do that. Right, now I'm going to put that somewhere warm to dry. My airing cupboard, I think. See you in a minute. Now while that dries, I'm going to show you something really quick to do to make your old jars look nice with decoupage. So I've got an old jar here and a lid. We're just doing the lid. So what I want to do to cover the lid is to create a circle that is about 2 centimetres larger on each side. I'm just going to draw around a cup for this. This one's the right size. And I'm going to cut around that circle. So as opposed to ripping up tiny bits for this, I'm keeping the whole piece of paper intact for my lid. Now I'm going to take my glue, not using too much, I'm just going to paint it onto the lid. Again, too much glue tends to equal big bulges under the paper, and that's what we want to avoid. And I'm going to put that right in the middle of my paper. Now most jars don't have a completely flat top, so what we want to do is really just push with our finger into those grooves so that it's completely stuck down, and sort of airtight. Lovely. Right, now because it's going to create creases when we fold over, the way we can get around that is by cutting little tabs about 1 centimetre apart from each other around the whole lid. Okay, I'm going to give that another extra rub down the top. Again, you can use any paper for this. If you don't even have paper, you could use some old fabric, that would work beautifully. Now, tab at a time, I'm going to glue in there. Make sure there's a bit of glue on the lid itself, right to the tip of the paper. And pull it fairly tight, not so tight that you rip it, but firmly over the edge. And stick it on the inside lip of the lid. And I'm going to carry that round all the way. Pulling it tight so you don't get any big lumps as you go. These jars make really nice storage for stationery or hair clips or hairbands or rubber bands or anything like that. I probably wouldn't use them for food because I don't know what glue you're using and if that's food safe. But who doesn't need a bit of extra storage? Great, so I've gone all the way around now. What I'm going to do is just check that there's no lumps and bumps around the side. Quite a good way of doing this is just rolling it along a non-precious table. Squeezes out any lumps. Now, if you like a particularly shiny look, you can coat that all in glue. But I really like the paper, actually. I like the mateness of it, so I'm going to keep it like that. Now, if you are a bit of a perfectionist and want to cover that messy innard, you can do that. Just take the measurement of the circle and cut a bit of paper to fit inside. Cut that out. Again, another thin layer of glue inside. Makes it look really neat. I'm going to pop that somewhere to dry and check on my bauble. Now that that's dry, I can screw my lid on and it can join its friends. I think they're really beautiful. Now it looks like the bauble is dry. Yeah, you want to wait till it's properly dry, not tacky, because then you don't want it to stick to the glass, because then you do get in a bit of a mess. I'm going to get out my scraps of paper. And then we're just continuing the same idea up the top. So put our thin layer of glue there. And we're carrying on with this overlapping. And squishing. We might need some slightly smaller pieces towards the top where things get a bit more fiddly. So we're just just going to go over that sort of lip at the top, which will cover with the cap when it's dry, so it'll look really neat. This is where your hands can get a bit messy. If you can avoid putting your fingers over wet glue on the bauble, it's good to do so because you can sort of rip the paper a bit. And I think this will be the last piece. Look at that, just enough paper. So that was 2 sheets of origami to cover this quite big bauble. A sort of standard bauble about this size only takes about 1 sheet. Okay, I can't see any gaps yet. Doesn't mean there aren't any. I'm going to pop that on there again. And as before, I'm going to cover that with another layer of glue for that shine. You know, be generous, but not so generous that it's going to drip and ruin whatever it's standing on. Right, that's off to the air and covered again to dry. Great. Okay, it looks like that's dry now. So you can carry on layering up the glue if you want a really, really shiny look. I'm going to show you now how to put the cap on. There you go. And that just makes it look so neat. There it is. I hope that you think it's an improvement on this black one. I think it looks a lot more cheerful and Christmassy. Thanks for watching along. I'd love to see anything that you've made. Do email East Kent Schools Together with any images that you have. I'd love to see those. If you would like a breakdown of the instructions on how to make this, then that's available on the East Kent Schools Together website. Please join us again for the next session of Paper Craft. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye!